everybody, Dan Held here, and felt like I needed to create a live stream today to talk about, why the reason we're here. Why are we here? Why does Bitcoin matter? I feel like today there's a particular news incident regarding the Kucoin hack to where I felt obligated to give a little bit of a historical lesson as to why Bitcoin was created, why does it matter, and what problem does it solve. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of the screenshots I wanted to share. Okay, so I'm not sure who all has heard about this yet. If you haven't, you must not be on crypto Twitter. But KuCoin got hacked to the tune of about 130 million, or to the tune of a couple $100 million. And it looks like 130 million are going to be frozen on chain by different crypto projects. These projects include like Onion Protocol, Vela Labs, etc. So these different cryptocurrency protocols are freezing on-chain funds. I mean, this is pretty insane because like the whole purpose of Bitcoin and the reason why Satoshi built blockchain technology to build Bitcoin was to solve the problem of trust. That you wouldn't have to trust anyone, that they would control the protocol or control your money. And what we're finding here is that they're completely centralized. These different protocols have frozen money on chain. Now with Tether, we understood that it was centralized, so this isn't that big of a surprise. But with these other coins, I'm very sure that their websites probably, let's see if Orion Protocol talks about, Orion Protocol. All right, let's check out Orion Protocol. Okay, so without ever giving up your private keys, great, until they seize your funds and reverse them on chain. So zero risk. Yeah, I don't think so. I think it is very risky. So that's just one example. I'm sure if I went through these, they similarly would use misleading marketing materials. But yeah, essentially that's the whole point of this technology, is that it's trustless. We remove trust from the equation, so we don't have to trust Orion Protocol and Vela Labs to go weigh in on who rightfully should deserve the money. For example, in the future, there might be a hack where it's more subjective, or like maybe the funds were seized, or there was a business issue where like two co-founders fight and split up the funds, and then it's sort of subjective as to who should get it. The whole point of this is that we remove that from the equation. So going back to the first piece of, this was the first thing that Satoshi wrote after he wrote the white paper. It's the first post on the P2P Foundation forum. And he goes, and he states, the root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency. But the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. Banks must be trusted to hold our money and transfer it electronically, but they lend it out in waves of credit bubbles with barely a fraction reserve. We have to trust them with our privacy, etc. So Satoshi is laying out the value prop for Bitcoin in terms of what problem is it solving. Coming from a product management background, when we look at solving, so every single software product you see, Apple, Google, Facebook, they're all solving a problem. So they go out and they iterate and iterate until they solve the problem really, really well for their customers. Bitcoin's problem that it's solving is trust. That's the whole point. We don't have to trust that someone. We don't have to trust someone with the money supply. We don't have to trust someone with approving my transaction or not. I can send it and know that it gets through. So in my series Planting Bitcoin, I cover essentially the origins of Bitcoin, why Bitcoin is a different species of money, and the role that hodlers play in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So when we look at the beginning of Bitcoin, and we look at how it got started, central banks have been around since the Bank of England. You've got but each time they go out and try to fix the monetary policy or take a monetary policy and action on it and press different levers to make things happen, they end up creating massive distortions in the market. And from Henry Paulson, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary and former Goldman Sachs CEO, he says, I believe the root cause of every financial crisis, the root cause is flawed government policies. He's completely right. The central banks do not have enough. And going back to my information theory of money, essentially there's an information problem, that central banks have an unsolvable data problem. They have to ingest, process, and analyze trillions of data points in the economy every single second just to know what's going on. You can kind of think about it like the Fed is driving a car, and the car is the economy, and all they can use is the rear view mirror because that's the historical data that they use to inform future policies. And the gas and brakes, after you press them, they take 30 seconds to kick in. Well, that's the existing fiat economies, is that you have these central banks essentially trying to drive a car with just looking through the rear view mirror, and the gas and brakes are somewhat useful but pretty laggy. And I was just on a podcast with Andreas Antonopoulos, and we were on with Laura Shen on an episode coming out here soon. And Andreas riffed on that analogy that I made, and he said that Bitcoin's like a train. We can all see the predictability of it. We don't have to guess where it's going. And so central banks inherently have this data problem where it's impossible to ingest all this data, and we have to trust that they make policy decisions when they have little to no information or poor information. And we've seen this reflected in all sorts of different things. Here's the global median inflation rate. This was compiled by Deutsche Bank in their A Journey into the Unknown long-term asset management study. And we look at 800 years of financial history, and you see the distortions that central banks lead to. This huge, massive increase in inflation. And then here's a classic government policy all the way back to the Romans. The silver content of a Roman denarius, this is essentially devaluing their currency to pay off their debts. And you can see it over hundreds of years doing that, which, and then we also have a former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, say, in the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings through confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value. So this all goes back to trust. It all goes back to solving the problem of trust. And when we look at these protocols, they're basically centralized systems. They're not really decentralized at all. They don't really solve a problem, which is about having a trustless money. And so when we look at, if we dig in a little bit more and we look at trust in general, right now young adults are less confident in a whole source of different institutions: military, religious, police, and business leaders. So depending on your age, if you look across, so 18 and 19 is the yellow. If you look across the yellow, kind of a yellow-orange here, yellow, younger age groups really, really distrust most leadership or most institutions of this country. It looks like scientists are probably the highest, most trusted group in terms of all age cohorts. And then same with the university professors, so a little bit more on the science and academia. But, we kind of see a wide distrust in all leadership, all institutions, as we have to trust them to make it all work. But oftentimes they don't, as we've seen with the coronavirus. As a response of most governments to the coronavirus have been very poor. And same with monetary policy. And then this just came out about a month ago. How many Americans trust the Federal Reserve? Even amongst Republicans, who are typically a little bit more trusting of these financial institutions, that dropped over a matter of a few months by quite a few points here. And then, of course, with independents, more libertarian leaning types, perhaps, their trust dramatically dropped. But as we see all this trust drop across the board, this is the problem that Bitcoin solves. We don't have to trust in any Bitcoin individual. We don't have to trust in the Bitcoin. There's no great cabal that organizes and selects that 21 million should be the hard cap or that it should change tomorrow. We all trust that it won't change. And we all believe and run the code, and all of Bitcoin is centered around that trust. It's also immutable, which means when I send Bitcoin, I don't have to worry about it being seized or reversed like Ethereum has done or these other protocols. That's the whole point. The whole point is I don't have to trust anyone for the monetary policy or for on-chain transactions. And then we look at, going back to what Satoshi said, banks must be trusted to hold our money. And JP Morgan pays $1 billion fine for manipulating the financial markets, which if you put this with the aggregate amount, I think the aggregate amount is around $260 trillion have been spent on bank fines. So yeah, the problem here is we can't trust our banks, we can't trust the government, we can trust Bitcoin. That's the whole point of why this was created. And part of this as well is around social scalability. And this is what Nick Szabo brought up. Socially scalable is about having the maximum number of individuals able to participate. If your protocol censors folks on chain, then inevitably that means that we cannot trust, and the social scalability of how many counterparties can trust each other is now reduced. If nothing is censored, that means that the social scalability is at its maximum. I don't have to worry about the monetary policy or on-chain transactions being manipulated, which means I can increasingly place trust into the protocol. And that increases the social scalability, aka the network effect, because I can interact with more and more counterparties. So this was, I wanted to cover this today. Also, Nick has phenomenal thoughts. I mean, everyone should read Nick's, some of his fundamental pieces on proof of work, like Shelling Out and the Origins of Money. It's called Shelling Out the Origins of Money, and his other thoughts on social scalability. But he has a great point here too, which is that as Bitcoin, some people look at Bitcoin as very conservative or Bitcoin's old technology. No, it's not that. It's reducing, if you reduce the number of arguments over the things that you want to change, you reduce the attack vectors. So, for example, like if we were to go debate what the proper rate of inflation is, that's a somewhat impossible and subjective statement. Like, how do we choose what the appropriate rate of inflation is? How do we ingest enough data points, parse and analyze them, and then press levers to action upon that? It's an impossible task. And so Bitcoin, due to its conservative nature, is really great for social scalability and solving that problem of trust, solving that problem of being that trusted world reserve currency, that gold 2.0. That's the whole point here. This is what we're here for. The root problem is it's all trust that's required to make it work, and that's what Bitcoin solves. So if you like this, check out my YouTube channel. It's Dan Held, or check out danheld.com/blog if you want to read some of my blogs, which include Planting Bitcoin and then the Information Theory of Money, which covers how markets and information are intertwined. Thanks for listening. Cheers.